All right. So I decided to restart my YouTube page, which is the New Federalist Papers. And I'm currently writing a book called The Fallacy of Government, which is an in-depth analysis of government systems, democracy, democratic and republican forms of government, how they're assembled, how they function, purpose of government, purpose of a constitution, laws, treaties, amendments. So basically, an in-depth discussion about the purpose of government and how the government is assembled to address that function. But I figured that with this election that's going on to elect a president, which in my opinion is totally unconstitutional, I figured that maybe we can do a short, or maybe not so short, depending on how much detail I have to get to in order to get it fixed, about how we elect the president and the role of the electors, role of political parties, role of the people to vote, and the process basically for electing the president and why they chose that process, which was in everybody's opinion was very good, and in Hamilton's opinion, if it wasn't perfect, it was at least excellent. Nobody had any problems with it because it's based on equality of participation of the states to choose a representative of the states and a manager for the executive departments. And when you look at the roles and responsibilities of the president, that's all you find. There are no executive powers that are not conditional on decisions that are made by the states as the union in Congress. That's why it's a legislative assembly. It's not just a Congress. You have two kinds of Congresses. You have a General Assembly and you have a Legislative Assembly. The General Assembly is how they wrote the Declaration of Independence, which means that they joined together, they assembled to discuss matters of a common interest. But that's all they can do is discuss it. If they produce a document or a decision or something like that, then they have to unanimously adopt it. That's why all the states that were on there had to sign on to the documents, because there was no way to make collective decisions at that time. And that's why they had to start the working on the Articles of Confederation right away, is to give structure to that collective decision-making function. And that is a legislative assembly. It's a democracy, really. The Confederate Assembly in a Congress was a democracy. All the states were assembled as equals. All the states had equal suffrage to reach a majority consensus. And when you have a legislative assembly, you have also requirements for how to operate that assembly. You have to have a quorum to operate, And that quorum, it just doesn't mean that you can hold proceedings in Congress. The quorum is necessary to identify and rank choices. So the way they put it was, a question is put. So one of the states has a concern or interest, and they put the question to the rest of the states. And so they need, in order to come up with the identify and rank choices and make cost benefit analysis, which is not just monetary cost. It can be any kind of cost that they incur collectively in order to address the question that's in consideration. And so a democracy is a legislative assembly. Like I said, all the states are assembled as equals. All the states have equal suffrage. If it was a democracy of the people, then all the people would have to be assembled. And a quorum of the people would have to assemble to discuss the question and agree to choices for how to deal with that question. It's not one of those situations where all the questions are either or, yes, no. They're not binary questions. So you can have 3, 4, 5 different options. I would say you want to limit it to the 5 best options because you don't want so many choices that you can't reach a majority consensus. So 3 to 5 is probably a good number, so that you can look at your cost benefit analysis and see where the people can make a choice. Like if you buy insurance today, you're going to get some options on what your deductible will be and how much you pay every month. Okay? I forget the word for it right now. But you will choose the couple that best suits your needs, whether it's a high deductible and a low premium or a high premium and a low deductible. And you will choose the point that best suits you. And that's what they do when they use what is called consensus choice. They have a number of choices that they provided through the quorum, and then the states vote to determine the choice by vote, 1 vote per state, and a majority of the states is necessary to the choice. So why is this important to the election, since that's what I said that I was going to talk about right now? Well, the election is done by consensus choice too. When they assembled a court to hear and decide the disputes and conflicts of the states, they used consensus choice in order to assemble that court, which is now the Supreme Court. Each state had to give 3 names from their own state. They couldn't choose anybody from another state. They had to choose 3 persons from their own state. They made a list in Congress. They reduced that list by lot, starting with the petitioner, because they had to do this every time they had a matter to adjudicate. So the petitioner would start, and he would, or she, the petitioner would strike names off the list, and the other litigant would strike the other state next, and they would continue to strike until there was only one person per state left. 13. So they started with 39 and they end with 13, which is the pool of justices. Every state had one justice in the pool. Then Congress would decide how to reduce that number to no less than 7 and no less than 9. 7 was a majority of the states, and 9 was the majority consensus of the states. And they only used the majority consensus of a simple majority for very trivial matters in Congress. Anything else, they had to have 9. And then once they got 7 to 9, then they would draw out of the hat 5 justices to hear and decide the matter, starting with the petitioner. So that way the court is totally non-biased, totally balanced. All the states participated in forming that court. All the people on that court were agreed to by all the states. So it wasn't like you have a ideological balance on the court, or imbalance as it is today. No, the states had to participate in assembling that court because they agreed to abide by the decisions of the court. So they had the right, as a member of a democracy, to have one of their own citizens on that court, or to be considered to be on that court. You couldn't just tell them that they chose Joe Blow and his sister from over, from who knows where, and they were going to judge. No, the states would have never agreed to that, because you can't resolve a decision if you're going to just tell me that I have to agree with a decision that I don't even agree with the people who are making it. So that's how you do a consensus choice in a democracy, which they could have done to choose the president. And in a way, they chose the president of the Committee of the States, which is the current Senate. Each state had one representative on the Committee of the States. One. To sit in recess of Congress. And among them, they chose one person, one of the representatives, to act as president, to preside over the proceedings, to make sure that they were operated properly. And that person could only serve as president 1 year in any 3 consecutive years. So even if they served 1 year, every year a different state sat as the president. Okay? You didn't have one state with a president. So they could have done something similar to that to seat the president of the United States. It could have said it was higher, say it was 5, okay, per state. Each state would give 5 names from their own state, and they would whittle it down to 1 per state, like they did for the court. Then they would rank it by voting, say for 2 people. Each state had to vote for 2 people on the list, but not from their own state. Okay? That ranked the list. Then they could take the top 5 off that list and form a ballot for them to determine their choice by vote. 1 vote per state. And a majority of all the states is necessary to the choice. Okay? They could have very easily done that. And if you read the Anti-Federalist Papers, that's exactly what they were asking for. they were saying, don't try to change everything at once. Let's do this incrementally so that we can control better how it functions. Okay? We need to control how it functions. It has to be incremental. But they didn't want to do that. They wanted to try to make all the changes at once. And as an engineer, I'll tell you right now, you can't make all the changes at once because you can't determine what you're benefiting from and what's a problem, because you've changed too many things at once to understand the system. Okay? So they could have done that. But since they added a Republican form of government to address the disparity between the states, to balance the legislative process, they said we can allow each state a number of choices equal to their proportion of the whole number of representatives in the House, which is the Republican principle for the number of choices. The problem with that is that states like California and Texas and the 9 largest states would dominate the aggregate list in Congress when they brought all the people's names together. Even if they said that they had to do it from one inside their own state, okay, then California would have today like 1,000 votes, or Virginia would have had like 13 of the 69 or whatever. They would have had a whole lot. So they're the people they wanted would be at the top of the list. And the people that the smaller states chose would just be a blip. So they fixed that by having the electors have 2 votes. That's how we got the vote for the vice president. They give each state 2 votes. One of those votes that each elector makes, those choices, has to be for a person from a state other than their own. Okay? So they can choose somebody from their own state with 1 vote. With the other vote, they have to choose somebody in another state. That prevents that dominance of the list, because a state like California has to cast just as many votes outside their state as they do within their state. So it balances it out and it ranks the list. And if you look at George Washington, when he was elected in the first election, there were 69 electors from 10 states. George Washington got 1 vote from every elector, which made his election unanimous. However, the state of Georgia had 5 electors. They chose 5 different people. Okay? 5. Yes, every elector they had chose Washington on one of their 2 ballots. On their second ballot, they put another name. So Washington may have won unanimously because he had was identified unanimously by all the electors. But that doesn't mean that he was the first choice of all those electors, because I'm sure he wasn't. Especially for other states who would rather have their own person as president. But he was recognized by all the states as being qualified and competent, suitable for the position. And that's what they're looking for. As they say, the cream rises to the top. Okay? So this process that they chose is a two-phase process. And they also could have done it in Congress if they wanted, because the electors are an exact duplication of Congress. They definitely could have just did it in Congress and have the representatives and senators in Congress vote or identify people they want. But the problem with that is they didn't want to establish a elite political class in the United States where they all, got together and decided who would be the president. They didn't want that. That's why we have electors. It's so that a secondary body can identify and vet all the candidates that are considered by the states in Congress. Okay? Must consider. And what are the electors? Well, there's a mathematical identity which says if A is proportional to B and B equals C, then A is proportional to C. A is all the people in the United States, all. Because the representatives in the House are an exact representation of the population. They're not just some representatives that you compete for. It has to be a representation. A representative is somebody you hire to advocate for your interest. A representation is a smaller version of the original. So the House has to look exactly like each state, and the federal House has to look exactly like the country. I'm talking about the demographic diversity of the country has to be in the House. Okay? And that way, every choice is made by 30,000 people, because each elector represents 30,000 citizens in their state. And yes, you'll have some people who might like Trump. I don't know if you would, but when they choose an elector, and they could have chosen themselves in the state legislature, because like in a state like Colorado, with 5.5 million people, they need a representative density that is different from the one for 30,000 that is the federal representative density. In Colorado, they may use a representative density that's like one representative for every 1,000 or every 10,000. Okay, and give themselves maybe 500 representatives in the House in Colorado, in their state legislature, for the most numerous legislative branch. Even though that in the federal legislature, their federal legislative delegation, they only have 190 based on the 2020 census. Okay, so they from that 500, each county could have chosen a proportional number from their county, just like they did when they formed the federal delegation in the House. 4 electors of themselves if they wanted to. Okay? And then each one of those electors is responsible for identifying and vetting 2 candidates to form a list for their state to be considered by all the states in Congress. And those lists, first of all, the list, the electors have to be chosen at the same time in every state. Same time. Exactly the same time in every state. And they must assemble in their state to give their vote on the same day. A day which is the same in every state in the Union. Okay? So Congress has the authority to set that time and day. And they can set it any time and day they want. They can choose the electors at 9 o'clock in the morning on tomorrow. And they can say that they have to assemble to deliberate and give their votes to make their list at noon. And then they could tell them that we want you to transmit your certified list, because the list has to be certified by the electors themselves, by their names, that all the names on their list meet all the requirements for holding office, and that they have complied with that each elector has to choose one person that it resides in another state other than their own. If there's any people on that list when they check it over that don't meet those qualifications, those persons are removed, and the elector that put them on there is instructed to choose another person. Before they certify the list, seal it, which means that nobody knows who did it, because they were sequestered to do this. They had to assemble, make their votes, make their list, certify the list, seal it, and transmit it sealed to the seat of government, directed to the President of the Senate. Then those lists are opened in Congress and compiled into an aggregate list, which is ranked because by the number of votes, because if you read the 12th Amendment, which is the reason why you have to have the names of the people who received votes, the number of votes they received, and for which office. Because of the 12th Amendment. Because the electors are required to place on their 2 ballots which one was cast for the president, which one was cast for the vice president. And it doesn't have to be the same between electors. I just told you, Georgia had 5 electors and they had 5 different names on their list. Okay? I might like candidate A and candidate B for vice president. A for president, B for vice president. My buddy over there, who's another elector, he might like candidate B for president, candidate C for vice president, and so on. And then when we make the list, you have to write down what office they received votes for. Okay? And then when it gets to Congress, if all the electors have identified one person by a majority of the electors, then that person becomes the president based on the votes of the people. Remember, the electors are a representation of the people, and they're proportional to the people. So when they vote, the people are voting. And the people, that same representation in their state chose the electors. So all the people, the full demographic diversity of the people is reflected in the votes that they choose. So if somebody wants to choose Trump, fine. If somebody wants to choose Harris, fine. But the Democrats and Republicans are only 13% and 11% of the people, respectively. There's still 76% of the people. And we don't have to agree with Trump and Harris. But when it gets to Congress, that's when it's going to, because nobody today is going to get a majority of the electors. Because properly assembled, we should have 11,021 representatives in the House. That's the whole number of representatives that does not exceed one representative for every 30,000 persons that reside within each state. And the way you get that whole number is you take the percentage each state is entitled based on the enumeration, and you use a proportionality constant to convert that percentage into a whole number. But you need boundary conditions. The first boundary condition is not to exceed the proportionality constant, 1 for 30,000. That would instruct them to truncate any fractional representatives that were calculated. So if they calculated 190.9, that 0.9 that they calculated would be truncated, and they would get a whole number of 190. Okay? The second boundary condition is for the specific case where a state has a population less than the proportionality constant, which will only calculate a fractional representative, which will be truncated by the first boundary condition, which leaves that state with no representation. And in that specific case, that state is entitled to one representative. Okay? That's how you get one representative. It ain't, if you just get, no, it's a proportionality constant. You can't, it's not a maximum. It's a proportionality constant, which means that if you change that number, then you will not maintain proportionality. And that's what you have to check when you set your proportionality constant, is that once you calculate the whole number of representatives, each state's proportion of the whole number of representatives, aggregate whole number, must equal the same percentage that they were calculated for by the enumeration. Okay, that's how you do that. You can't do it any other way because you lose proportionality. Okay? So the role of the electors is to form a list of candidates for the states to consider. Okay? So it breaks up the process into two phases. One assembly identifies and ranks the choices. Another assembly must consider those choices to determine their choice by vote. One vote per state, and a majority of the states is necessary to the choice. That's a democracy. Okay? That is the dictionary connotation or denotation or evertation. It's a democracy. That's what democracy is. All must participate as equals with equal suffrage to reach a majority consensus of all that are assembled. If it's all the people, then you just shift it. You can't use the ballot box for this reason. If you try to use all the people as the legislative assembly, a democracy, then the quorum has to be maybe 2/3 or at least half of all the people just to form the ballot that they're going to use to consider their choice at the ballot box. And then, in order to determine that choice, you need a majority of all the people, not just a polarity of voters that chose to participate. Hell, we elected Trump with 18% of the people. Does that even make sense? And you would be shocked if you looked into how many people actually participate in these primary elections for the parties, which they're using to form the ballot. Do I have a choice on that ballot as being nonpartisan? No. So why are you forcing me to choose between one of your two candidates? That's a bridge too far for me. I have a right to participate just like you. And I won't want to, if I have to make the choice, I want somebody I want considered. I'm not going to choose between the parties. I'm not going to get in that game. Which it is. What gives them the right to choose the candidates and rise one of their own to the presidency? Okay? None. So basically, what we have to understand is that consensus choice is a two-phase process. Okay? Which is used to make all these choices and decisions, and basically it is the governor for the legislative assembly. You have to have a quorum to identify and rank choices, and then to form a ballot of choices that the states must consider to determine their choice. They can't go off that ballot. That ballot is formed by the quorum of all the people. They can rank it and take a top number of choices off that ballot, but they can't come up with a decision of their own. That's why people don't understand the difference between the House and the Senate. The House and the Senate both are assemblies of the states, proportional by their population in the House and as equals in the Senate. But it's the House that is responsible for determining the choices that the states must consider. And the Senate has the power of concurrence over those choices. Okay? Which means that the 9 largest states in our union can pass any measure they want out of the House based on their proportional suffrage in the House. anything. But when it's transmitted to the Senate, there are 41 states in the Senate to reject that measure and return it to the House for reconsideration, along with amendments to advise those 9 states what would be necessary for their concurrence on those measures. That's what balanced everything. They balanced the democratic process by splitting it into 2 separate assemblies instead of 1. To protect the minority interest of both the large and small states, because the large states are a minority in a democracy. They're 9 of 50 is a minority. So those states wouldn't have any control over any aspect of the choices that were being made by the government, because their size wouldn't matter in a democracy, because you're all equals. Size doesn't matter. That's why they had to form a balanced system, an iterative system, to at least allow the larger states to say no. And to, since they got the money and they got the resources and the supplies, they should have a say in how much they want to spend and the scope and cost of things. That's only fair. But they can't just do that on their own. They have to get concurrence from the small states, because it might not be in the small states' interest to pay their proportion for those measures. And that's why you have the Senate with the power of concurrence over all laws. Now, when it comes to treaties, that's only done in the Senate. That is a unicameral democracy, just like it always has been since they wrote the Articles of Confederation. And it takes 2/3 of the states to agree on anything when it comes to how the states act as a union. When they first wrote the Articles of Confederation, it was to make the decisions of a free and independent state with the full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things that a independent state may by right do. Okay? So what they did when they wrote the Constitution, you have one congressional assembly that concentrates on maintaining the union and to manage how the states interact with each other through laws. Then you still have the Confederate Assembly to manage how the states act as the Union when they interact with foreign entities and foreign countries. How they act. When it comes to the division of responsibility, division of power, separation of power, one makes sure that the union is still operating properly and the states are interacting with each other. The other is, how do we act collectively? And that's the Confederate Assembly. I'm going to stop there because I'm at 45 minutes and I didn't mean to get on that high on the horse, but no, what they're doing today in Congress or to elect the president, it's totally unconstitutional and should be stopped immediately. Thank you.